Chapter 5, Fundamentals of Patrol. Probably going to split this one up into 2 sections because it is a large chapter. Patrolling is the main activity that you will perform daily. The primary purpose of patrolling are to maintain a public presence, enforce laws and ordinances, and deter crime. Reactive patrol is about responding to or dealing with a crime after it occurs. Proactive patrol discourages criminal activity by having an officer regularly present in the area. Community-oriented policing is a concept that encourages the community to work with law enforcement and address what causes crime and other issues affecting the community. The goal of community policing is to look at issues that are typical of certain neighborhoods and to work with the community to fight these problems. Community-oriented policing has 2 main parts: community partnerships and problem solving. Community partnerships increase understanding and trust between law enforcement agencies and their communities. Then you have problem solving. Community partnerships allow law enforcement agencies to develop long-term proactive plans and always to address problems in the community. Preparing to patrol. Make sure your duty inspection. At the beginning of your shift, you're going to check all of your items on your belt. Make sure you have a working flashlight for every shift. Check your patrol vehicle, your fire extinguishers, biohazard gear, and first aid kits. Never assume that others have maintained equipment. Roll call is a brief operational meeting that officers attend before starting the shift. Becoming familiar with the patrol area. One of the first things you will learn as a patrol officer is the layout of your assigned area, district, or jurisdiction. Before going on patrol, identify the boundaries of your assigned patrol area. Make sure to become familiar with major roads, landmarks, and community resources so you can respond quickly. Know your patrol area so you can recognize suspicious activity. Suspicious activity is any activity that is abnormal for a specific time of day in a particular area. Patrol methods. The 3 most common types of patrol methods are motor vehicle, foot, and bicycle. Foot patrol has many advantages, such as allowing you to be visible to the public and accessible to your community. And day or night, make sure to keep changing your patrol routine to keep others from predicting your patrol patterns. Officer safety and survival. Safety is an important aspect of your job as a law enforcement officer. Improper training, poor planning, carelessness, and complacency can all contribute to officer fatalities and injuries. Observation is the act of recognizing an occurrence using your senses by noticing people, things, or circumstances. Cover is anything that creates a bullet-resistant barrier between an officer and a threat. Concealment is an object or group of objects that creates a visual barrier between an officer and a threat but may not stop a projectile. It is preferable to use cover rather than concealment. Using your senses. Sight is often the starting point for observation. So remember, the test asks, what is the starting point of your observation? That would be sight. Hearing, that is affected by background noises such as traffic, noises from residences, or environmental sounds, may prevent you from recognizing specific sounds that indicate a crime or incident is in progress. Smell can help you identify dangerous or illegal substances, but note that never smell the contents of a container, especially when dealing with any unknown substance. Touch can help you identify items during a search, but never use taste as a way to identify any unknown substance. So taste is not even an option here because you should never use taste to identify any substance. Safety and survival procedures. Survival readiness may include tactical preparedness, such as always having a plan anytime you enter a building, firearm proficiency, physical fitness, situational awareness, and first aid skills. Practice situational awareness, which is the ability to pay attention to what is going on around you. Avoid tunnel vision, sometimes referred to as funnel vision, which is the narrowing of the field of view during a stressful event such as a vehicle pursuit, foot chase, or armed confrontation. To avoid tunnel vision, scan your surroundings, practice controlled breathing, and task-relevant self-talk. Make sure to disarm a suspect before leaving cover if possible. Abandon your vehicle if it becomes disabled or there is no other avenue of escape. Factors that compromise officer safety. If you do not use and maintain your equipment and it breaks down, you could be seriously injured or killed. Exercise and wellness program is an important part of your fitness for duty. Make sure to get enough sleep to do your job well. When interacting with anyone, pay attention to nonverbal cues. Never assume that any call is routine. Each call is different. Rely on your training experience, not emotional reactions, to perform your duties safely. Lesson 3, electronic communications. All computer activities recorded per FBI security policy and subject to review under public records law. With this in mind, always have professional behavior. Using the radio. The radio is the most common communication device that officers use. Basic police radio communication depends on 3 types of equipment: the dispatch console or base station, vehicle-mounted radio, portable or handheld radio. Most agency radio systems consist of multiple channels, such as primary dispatch, talk around, and specialized. Communications personnel. Public safety telecommunicators, also known as dispatchers, are the hub of contact for patrol officers. Dispatchers transmit calls, receive calls for assistance from officers, broadcast information about wanted and missing persons, check records, and perform many other tasks daily to assist patrol officers. When using the radio, conduct all radio communication in a professional manner. Understand that you should have no expectation of privacy on the radio. Transmit only information related to law enforcement business. Appropriate radio system also includes relaying law enforcement-related messages to other agencies, driver's license status and driver history, calls for service, criminal records checks, hazard material queries, vehicle, boat, and aircraft registration queries, and road and vehicle conditions. Radio protocol describes the customs and regulations for constructing and transmitting radio messages. This includes your proper use of codes and signals. There are 4 basic radio codes: signals, phonetic alphabet, numeric or 10 code, or the alphanumeric code. So signals is a system that uses the word signal before numbers. For example, signal 0. The phonetic alphabet system uses the letters of the English alphabet to identify letters in voice communication. For example, alpha is A, B is Bravo. The numeric or 10 code system uses the number 10 before other numbers that represent specific activities. The alphanumeric code just combines the two. So that would be like reading a license plate. RVB 632 would be Romeo Victor Bravo 632. So that just is combining numbers and the letters. Make sure to press and hold the transmit button down for about 1 second before speaking. Otherwise, your first words will be lost when using radio traffic. Make sure to notify dispatch whenever you go on or off duty. When you receive a call from dispatch, respond with your assigned identification and your current location. This may include the type of complaint, incident location, and the suspect's description. This is information that dispatch would provide. Make sure to write it down and don't leave anything to memory. Officer-initiated transmission. Make sure to give your identification and location, the type of situation, the type of assistance needed, a description of involved people or groups, and a description of the vehicles. Lesson 4 of Patrol Basics. Querying is the process of gathering information by entering or running a search in a database for law enforcement purposes. The Florida Crime Information Center, FCIC, is a database housed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that provides statewide information on people and property, driver's license and registration, wanted and missing persons, stolen guns, vehicles, securities, and other property, person status files and computerized criminal histories, and concealed weapons licenses. So, again, FCIC is the Florida Crime Information Center, and that is housed in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE. FCIC is connected to the National Crime Information Center, which is NCIC. So they're both connected. NCIC is a national database maintained by the FBI. This is the NCIC system has records of stolen, abandoned, and recovered property and wanted and missing persons. It also contains the National Sex Offender Registry. Make sure to know what a CCH is. The FDLE reviews information and fingerprints and creates a computerized criminal history in FCIC. Only law enforcement agencies that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, can enter data about stolen property and wanted and missing persons into FCIC. FCIC, NCIC access and restrictions. Criminal Justice Information Services, CJIS, certification training course, and you have to pass a certification exam before you are allowed access to FCIC and NCIC. So again, you have to complete a Criminal Justice Information Services certification training course and pass certification exam before you are allowed access to FCIC, NCIC. And that check takes 30 days starting your job to be assigned to an FCIC terminal. Using FCIC, NCIC system for purposes other than your law enforcement duties may result in disciplinary action, loss of your certification, and criminal charges. FCIC, NCIC logs all user transactions. Then we move on to an exact match in a database is called a hit. The purpose of the hit confirmation process is to make sure that the information in the system is active and matches the person or property of interest. Even if the hit indicates that the entering agency does not require a wanted person's extradition, you should still contact the entering agency in case they desire to follow up a report. Extradition is the surrender of a fugitive to another state or nation that has jurisdiction. The Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, DHSMV, maintains an online search database known as the Driver and Vehicle Information Database. That is DAVID. Again, that is Driver and Vehicle Information Database, DAVID. Authorized users have the ability to view driver's license applications, state-issued ID cards, identification documents, driving and vehicle history for motorists, insurance information, and records of vehicles or vessels registered in Florida. Members of the criminal justice community use the Criminal Justice Network, CJNet, to access many other valuable information databases. These include Insight, a statewide crime intelligence database, Florida's Integrated Criminal History System, which is Falcon, the Child Abduction Response Team, which is CART, and the Florida Sexual Offender and Predator Database. Improper management of criminal databases and information is a misuse of your position. The Florida statutes state that it is a felony to willfully, knowingly, and without authorization access or allow access to any criminal justice computer system, or computer network. All right, Unit 2, Duties on Patrol. Lesson 1, Initial Response. When responding to a call, when selecting a route, identify the safest and quickest route to the location. The most direct route may not always be the quickest, so keep that in mind. Make sure to identify the type of incident, the location, the complainant's name, and their relationship to the location. While on the way, consider the safest arrival point and the possible threats at the incident. Threats may include weapons, things that can be used as weapons, and hazards. These factors determine the number of officers that respond to a scene. All right, when arriving on the scene, when exiting the patrol car, close the door gently and quietly. Make sure to secure the contents of your pockets and equipment on your duty belt. Turn your cell phone to silent. Scan the area for threats. Identify areas for cover and concealment. Avoid backlighting and silhouetting other officers. Maintain contact with dispatch throughout the incident. Officer safety when approaching a scene. As you approach the scene, take and maintain the best tactical position, especially if you are waiting for backup. Approach suspicious vehicles on foot and carefully check for occupants. Feel the hood of a vehicle for heat to determine if the vehicle was driven recently. Get close to buildings by moving behind parked cars, fences, trash cans, and shrubbery. Walking in a low, crouching position and taking an indirect route will help minimize the chances of detection. Bolo. Recall that a bolo, be on the lookout, gives a description of the subject's name, and any additional information that would help apprehend or locate them. Bolos are issued for Amber Alerts, which are America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response, Silver Alerts, which are for missing and endangered adults, Blue Alerts for the capture of violent criminals who kill or seriously injure law enforcement officers, or Purple Alerts, which are for missing disabled adults. All right, Lesson 2, Approaching the suspect. Always watch the person's hands and body language when talking with anyone. Usually, the primary officer on the call is the contact officer. This officer is responsible for leading the approach and handling all communication with the suspect, including commands and interviews. So remember that the primary officer on the call is the contact officer. The backup officer is the cover officer and is strictly responsible for the officer safety concerns on the scene. The cover officer's responsibility includes observing the contact officer's interaction with the suspect and watching for hazards such as hostile crowds, traffic, or escape routes. Initiating contact and establishing communication with the suspect. When moving towards a suspect, approach the suspect carefully. Keep your eyes on the suspect. Make sure that you keep a safe distance. Stay alert to possible resistance or threats. Observe the suspect's position and body movements, and continually scan for weapons. If you have a justifiable reason to believe that the suspect poses a threat or may flee, handcuff them upon initiating contact. Know that resisting an officer without violence occurs when a person nonviolently resists, obstructs, or opposes a law enforcement officer. For example, they're not obeying your commands and they're refusing to be handcuffed or refusing to provide identification, or they're fleeing. You should always request voluntary compliance, but when this is not possible, ask the person to comply. If the person still does not comply, tell the person to comply. So you're going to ask, and then you're going to tell. If the asking and telling do not work, you have the authority to make the subject comply with the lawful order using techniques explained in defensive tactics. Then we come to resisting an officer with violence. This occurs when a person knowingly resists or obstructs a law enforcement officer by committing or offering to commit a violent act towards a law enforcement officer while the officer is performing their legal duties. For example, they're fighting against you. Techniques to help identify people when you believe they're providing false information include running a search of the person in David, ask for social security number and compare it with FCIC, NCIC, ask for an address and compare it to FCIC, NCIC, or David, use a portable fingerprinter scanner to establish identity. All right, Lesson 3, Responding as Backup. Non-life-threatening situations can range from assisting with administrative paperwork to providing additional equipment. High-risk situations may include assisting with serving a warrant or responding to a vehicle pursuit or responding to a scene where the suspect is still present. A life-threatening situation may include dealing with an active shooter or a vehicle crash with serious injuries. Upon arrival, survey the scene and maintain situational awareness. The role of the backup officer on a scene is to provide whatever assistance the primary officer needs. All right, then we have behavioral threat assessment and management. Targeted violence refers to incidents of violence involving an identifiable person of concern or perpetrator who possesses the intent and capability to cause physical harm to an identifiable target, which is the victim. So targeted violence refers to violence with a person targeting a specific victim. Human behavior, particularly violent behavior, cannot be readily predicted, but it may be prevented. Then we move on to the behavioral threat assessment and management process. This is BTAM. It is a proactive investigative process used to identify, assess, and manage the risk of targeted violence posed by an identified or identifiable person. So this includes observable attack-related behaviors that indicate the perpetrator may be on a pathway to violence. The primary goal of BTAM is to prevent or mitigate acts of targeted violence, especially incidences of mass targeted violence. So that is the goal, is to prevent or mitigate these violences. The primary functions of BTAM are to identify, assess, and manage persons of concern within the local community. So primary function, you're managing people that are identified as, on the pathway to violence. The primary goal is to prevent or mitigate these acts of violence. So first, we have identify. On patrol, you will respond to a variety of calls for service where you may see or hear something that leads you to identify this person. Make sure to collect and report this information. Give a detailed description of the encounter, your reasons for concern, and personally identifiable information for the person and any relevant witnesses. Then we have assess. The core of the BTAM is to assess the person's risk for future targeted violence against an identifiable target. So again, I'm going to go through those three. So primary goal is to prevent, mitigate acts of violence. The primary function is to manage people of concern. And then the core of the BTAM is to assess a person's risk and try to figure out, if they are at risk, if they are going to consider violence. Then you have manage. Then you're just managing the persons of concern. Managing can be doing like an RPO. All right, assisting your community. So when assisting your community to a non-criminal call for service, we're going to go through some of these websites and agencies. There are the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Department of Children and Families, local mental health services, and the County Clerk of Courts are all good resources. Florida law authorizes officers to command assistance from the public in certain situations, such as apprehending or securing a person for breach of the peace, or in the case of a rescue or an escape of a person arrested upon a civil process. So Florida law allows officers to command assistance from people around you. Lesson 2, Well-being and Security Checks of Unit 3 for non-criminal calls for service. Well-being checks. You may notice a situation that requires a well-being check, such as bad odor coming from a residence or an abnormal presence of flies, which shows lack of activity. Another thing is an overflowing mailbox. And then, let's see, we're moving on to here. Then we're going to go here to death notifications. Notifying the next of kin. Do know that if you use the David Emergency Contact Information, ECI, follow your agency policies and procedures, and remember that ECI is for emergency purposes only and cannot be used as an investigative tool. If the next of kin lives in another state or town and you are not able to go to their home, contact the law enforcement agency in that area and request that one of their officers make the notification. Then we have animal complaints. Exotic animal calls may include pythons, parrots, and monitor lizards. They are exotic because they are not native to Florida. Fire-related incidents. Make sure if you arrive at the scene of an incident with a fire, notify dispatch immediately and request assistance. Foam fire extinguishers are best for paper or wood fires. CO2 fire extinguishers are more suitable for flammable liquids. So again, when you think of foam, think of paper and wood. And with CO2, that is flammable liquids. So the way I would think about that is, CO2, think of that as a liquid, and that's for flammable liquids. Foam works good on paper or fire because it can sit right on top of it. Then we move to lost, stolen, or recovered property. For lost property, use a general information report to document these incidents. Keep in mind that lost property may turn into stolen property. All right, stolen property in the custody of a pawnbroker. When a law enforcement officer has probable cause to believe the property in a pawnbroker is misappropriated, you can place a written hold order on the property. The written hold order shall impose a holding period not to exceed 90 days unless extended by another court order. An appropriate law enforcement officer may place only one hold order on property at a time. Florida law allows an owner or operator of a theme park, entertainment complex, zoo, museum, aquarium, public food service establishment, or public lodging establishment to dispose of or donate any lost or abandoned property found on its site. They have to hold it for at least 30 days. If the property remains unclaimed after 30 days, the owner can dispose of or donate the property to a charitable institution. They cannot sell it. Property disputes. Make sure to know that property boundary disputes, landlord and tenant disputes are civil disputes in nature. So the Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act governs most of the traditionally recognized rental agreements for dwellings. The only way a landlord can legally recover possession of a leased residence without the consent of the tenant is to file an eviction proceeding in the county court where the residence is located. If the landlord is successful, a writ of possession will be issued by the court to the sheriff, who is then authorized to evict the tenant and put the landlord in possession of the residence after a prescribed notice period. So remember, that is a writ of possession. This allows you to repossess your house. You may physically evict a tenant only following a writ of possession. If you don't, this would be considered a wrongful eviction. The Residential Landlord-Tenant Act does not apply in these three types of residential rental facilities: public lodging establishments such as hotels and motels, medical, geriatric, educational, counseling, religious, or similar residency facilities, and recreational vehicle parks. So in those types of cases, you don't have to get a writ of possession. You don't have to go to the court. You can automatically just kick them out. Repossession of property. When a person or company that is owed money, called a creditor, sells or leases property to a person who takes out a loan, called a borrower, the creditor may get a security interest or lien against the property in the form of a contract or security agreement. If the borrower defaults, the creditor may get a court order that allows him to take possession of the collateral. This is called a writ of replevin. So remember, a writ of replevin is repossession of property, where a writ of possession is the repossession of a house from a tenant. Florida law permits a creditor to take possession of the collateral after default without a court order if it could be done without breach of the peace. This is called a self-help repossession. Remember, you can't breach the peace. That would be self-help repossession. So types of property likely to be repossessed include motor vehicles, mobile homes, motorboats, aircrafts, personal watercrafts, all-terrain vehicles, farm equipment, and industrial equipment. Motor vehicles are the most common type of repossessed property. All right, when responding to a dispute or confrontation about repossession of a vehicle, you will have to determine if the vehicle has already been attached to the tow truck and is ready for transport, or the recovery agent is behind the steering wheel of the vehicle ready to drive away. In this case, the repossession is complete and the recovery agent should be permitted to leave. But if there is a breach of the peace, in this situation, the recovery agent cannot lawfully take the vehicle. So even if the person is behind the wheel, if this ends up causing a breach of peace, arguments, yelling, this and that, they are not allowed to take it. Motor vehicle repair disputes. The Florida statutes permit the vehicle owner who refuses to pay the repair bill to take possession of the vehicle after posting a bond with the clerk of the court. If the vehicle owner refuses to pay the repair cost and removes the vehicle from the repair shop without posting a bond, then the vehicle owner should be investigated for theft. All right, then we have civil disturbance, and we're going to go all the way through this chapter. I think I can do it in a good amount of time. An injunction is a court order that requires a person to do or refrain from doing specific acts, such as having no contact with a former spouse or a specific victim of domestic violence. Civil standby. You may be called to maintain the peace through officer presence while serving a court order or responding to a call for service. This action is known as a civil standby. Then we have crowd control. Assessing the crowd. Make sure with crowd control you observe situations that could include disorderly intoxication, affrays and riots, unlawful assemblies, routs, melees, and mobs, breach of the peace, and disorderly conduct. These are things that are illegal with crowds. Identifying the problem. Try to determine the threat level of the crowd, demonstration, or riot by observing the mood, location, direction of travel, and the size of the crowd. Make sure you know that officer safety is your first consideration. Calling for assistance and waiting for backup are critical when engaging a crowd or demonstration. An important part of dispersing crowds and resolving group incidents is determining the leader or instigator. And independent criminal violations may occur in the crowd. Alarms and searches. Responding to a security alarm. Alarms can come from homes, retail stores, schools, government offices, or medical facilities, and they could involve incidents of burglary, robbery, panic, fire, or medical alerts. Some agency policies require at least 2 officers to respond to alarm calls. Make sure you do not search buildings alone. And the greatest threat in a building search is the possibility of a suspect in hiding. Before entering a building, generally you enter buildings through a doorway. And before entering a building, request an emergency radio channel through dispatch and draw your firearm. As you move through a building, remain aware of narrow spaces that restrict movement. These are commonly referred to as fatal funnels. Fatal funnels are typically doorways, hallways, and windows. Corners that cannot be visually cleared from the doorway, also known as deep corners, must be checked first upon entry. So remember, those are called deep corners. Those are corners that cannot be visually cleared from the doorway. A technique for visually clearing a corner is cutting the pie or edging. Then you have the crisscross technique. In the crisscross technique, officers start on opposite sides of the doorway. They enter rapidly, one after the other, crossing to the opposite side. And then you have the button hook, which is also called the wraparound technique. An officer and a partner enter the room by hooking around the corner at the point of entry. While searching, clear rooms of immediate threats, starting with deep corners first. Area searches. A perimeter is an area of containment surrounding the site of an incident. It is best to start with a large perimeter and then go smaller as you need. A basic perimeter can be set with minimal resources, usually by 2 officers. Stay at your post until you are relieved or relocated or the situation has been resolved. Perimeters can be effective even with limited resources by good planning and positioning. Make sure that when you're searching for a suspect, be aware of the noise you are making and move only as fast as you can to remain safe, which I think also applies to active shooter. Make sure you're only moving as fast as you can to shoot and as fast as you can to be safe. Consider any person in the search area a potential threat until you or another officer determine their status. Fleeing suspect on foot. During a consensual encounter, if the person you are speaking to decides to flee, you do not have grounds to pursue. So the exam question comes up, is you're within a consensual encounter, and you could try to speak with somebody, and they take off and flee, let them go. A person's flight is not enough to provide probable cause for an arrest, but it does contribute to reasonable suspicion to detain the person for investigation. When you have reasonable suspicion to detain a suspect, and the suspect flees, you have the authority to pursue. So if you have reasonable suspicion, maybe you got a call from a good witness saying, hey, we witnessed this is a description of the suspect, this is where he's at. You show up, you have that reasonable suspicion, he matches basically that bolo. You start approaching him, he takes off, you have reasonable suspicion, you can pursue him at that point. Safety considerations during a foot pursuit include probability that the suspect is armed, the seriousness of the offense committed, the threat to officers and the public. Obviously the location, the time of day, if the suspect is known. And a lot of these are, if you know the person, if you have their ID, if they're armed, if it's not a really serious offense, maybe you cancel the pursuit because it's not worth your life. Make sure these effects include selective hearing, tunnel vision, and rapid breathing. So just be aware of your physiological effects of stress and fatigue during a foot pursuit, which again is selective hearing, tunnel vision, and rapid breathing. Taking custody of the suspect. People near the scene may be using personal mobile devices to record all aspects of the incidents, including your behavior. This is not a criminal offense, and you cannot interfere unless the person recording the incident is actively obstructing the investigation. Most agencies has to have a designated public information officer, which is a PIO, who is responsible for releasing information to the media. Again, the person responsible for releasing information to the media is the public information officer. Specific transport situations. When transporting a pregnant arrestee, you may want to place restraints in the front of the arrestee. Note your weather conditions and temperature if you're transporting somebody. You cannot transport a juvenile in the same vehicle with an adult. Make sure to notify dispatch of your started and ending mileage. If they're under the influence of alcohol, make sure to keep an eye on them, and you might need to call medical. When you're en route, the arrestee When you're en route, you might have, in situations that cause interruptions, find a safe place to pull over, notify dispatch, and call your supervisor. The arrestee becomes combative or removes the restraints. The arrestee has a medical issue. The transport vehicle is involved in a crash. You encounter a life-threatening event. The arrestee escapes or attempts to escape. Transporting an incarcerated pregnant person. According to the Healthy Pregnancy for Incarcerated Women Act, you must not use restraints for an incarcerated pregnant person who is in labor, delivery, or postpartum recovery unless you determine that they present a substantial flight risk or there is some other extraordinary medical or security circumstance that makes restraints necessary. Again, make sure to notify dispatch to report the ending mileage and the starting mileage. Maintain physical control of the arrestee during escort into the facility. You are responsible for the arrestee until the facility staff receives them, and after transporting an arrestee, thoroughly search the passenger compartment of the vehicle as soon as practically possible. All right, last lesson here, which is processing the arrestee. You can take a juvenile to a secure booking area of a jail or an adult jail for temporary custody for no more than 6 hours, or for the purpose of fingerprinting and photographing them as long as the juvenile is out of the sight and hearing of adult arrestees. So remember, two things when you're taking a juvenile to an adult facility. They cannot be there for more than 6 hours, and make sure they are out of the sight and sound of adult arrestees. You cannot release a juvenile on their own recognizance when custody is terminated. So they need to be released to an adult relative, a qualified person, an organization who's taking custody, etc. And that concludes Chapter 5, Fundamentals of Patrol.